There's a kind of freedom no document can grant you. No fireworks can symbolize it. No national holiday can replace it. And that's emotional freedom, the moment you realize your peace no longer depends on anything or anyone outside of you. That moment, that shift, is when independence truly begins. We grow up being told that freedom is about external things, borders, rights, governments, declarations. And yes, those matter deeply. But what about the war within? What about the battles you fight in silence? The ones in your mind, in your heart, when you lie awake at night. Not because of what's outside, but because of what you're carrying inside. Emotional bondage doesn't come with chains you can see. It shows up in quieter ways, like overthinking every word you said in a conversation 2 days ago. Like constantly seeking approval even from people who don't truly know you. Like replaying the past on a loop and predicting disaster in the future and calling it being realistic. These are the prisons we build ourselves, brick by brick, thought by thought. And when July 4th comes around with its flags and parades and proud declarations of liberty, it's easy to forget that some of us are still not free, not in the ways that matter most. We still tie our self-worth to how others see us. We still silence our voice to keep the peace in rooms that don't feel safe. We still measure success by how busy we are, how much we produce, how well we keep up appearances. And while the world may applaud those things inside, we often feel like we're falling apart quietly. The truth is, the cost of emotional dependence is heavy. When your peace depends on other people's behavior, on external outcomes, on things you cannot control, you're never truly at rest. You may look composed on the outside, but inside, it's a constant calculation. Will they like me? Will this work out? What if they leave? What if I'm not enough? So we try harder. We people please. We chase. We perform. We over-explain. We shrink. We inflate. We contort ourselves into versions we think the world will accept, hoping that maybe, just maybe, we'll finally feel safe. Finally feel loved. Finally feel free. But that's not freedom. That's dependency in disguise. And it's exhausting. Emotional freedom begins the moment you stop outsourcing your worth. It begins when you realize that not everyone has to understand you for you to be at peace. That not every comment needs a response. That not every relationship deserves your access. And that your energy is sacred, not everyone gets to touch it. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently. More wisely, more intentionally. It means you don't let temporary opinions shake your permanent truth. It means you start choosing silence not out of fear, but from strength. You no longer need to convince people of your value. You live it, quietly, fully, and yes, that's easier said than done. Especially when you've been conditioned your whole life to seek approval, to be good, to keep things pleasant, to never rock the boat. But there comes a moment sometimes, after enough heartbreak, enough burnout, enough pretending, where something inside you snaps. Not in a destructive way, but in a liberating way. You wake up one day and realize, I cannot keep living like this. I cannot keep giving so much of myself away just to feel temporarily okay. That moment, that decision, is the birth of true independence. It's not loud. It doesn't come with a celebration, but it's real, and it changes everything. You start pulling your power back. You notice when your nervous system is on high alert and ask yourself why. You question the beliefs you've never questioned before. Why do I feel guilty for resting? Why do I panic when someone's upset with me? Why do I equate being needed with being loved? This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about becoming conscious. Becoming aware of the invisible strings that have been pulling you for years and deciding to cut them one by one. Emotional freedom isn't about perfection. It's not about never feeling hurt or afraid again. It's about creating space between the feeling and the reaction. It's about responding instead of reacting, choosing instead of spiraling, noticing the storm and realizing you don't have to become it. You still feel, you still care, but your sense of self no longer crumbles under pressure. And maybe this July 4th, instead of just watching fireworks in the sky, you can start igniting something inside yourself too. A quiet revolution, a deeper kind of independence. Because when you're emotionally free, life doesn't necessarily get easier, but it does get clearer. You move with more intention. You protect your peace like it's worth something because it is. You stop settling. You start listening to your inner knowing. You recognize when something feels off, and you trust yourself enough to walk away even when it's hard. The journey toward emotional freedom isn't about doing more. It's about unlearning. Unlearning the patterns that kept you small. The beliefs that told you love must be earned. The behaviors that felt like survival but were actually self-abandonment. True independence isn't about control. It's about release. Letting go of what was never yours to carry. Releasing the need to always have it all figured out. Trusting that you can live through uncertainty without falling apart. That you can belong to yourself even when the world doesn't get it. So if you've been carrying the weight of emotional expectations, if you've been molding yourself to fit into places that don't honor your truth, maybe this is your sign. Your Independence Day doesn't have to wait. It starts with a decision, a breath, a pause. A whisper to yourself, I'm allowed to live differently now. You don't need permission. You just need presence. And the willingness to come home to yourself again and again. Emotional freedom, unlike physical freedom, is not marked by clear borders. It doesn't arrive with sirens or certificates. It reveals itself slowly through self-awareness, through repeated choices, and most of all, through presence. But to truly arrive at this freedom, we need to understand the machinery of the mind that often keeps us from it. Let's begin with the illusion of control. Worry masquerades as responsibility. Anxiety disguises itself as preparedness. Overthinking feels like problem solving. But underneath it all, these patterns are driven by fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being caught off guard. Fear of being rejected, abandoned, or alone. We live in a society that trains us to think our value lies in our productivity, our performance, our likability. From a young age, we're rewarded for obedience, praised for excellence, and taught to suppress emotions that make others uncomfortable. The result: a generation of adults who feel guilty for resting, ashamed of saying no and terrified of not meeting every expectation laid upon them. This internalized pressure doesn't just shape our decisions, it hijacks our nervous systems. When you constantly anticipate rejection or failure, your body stays in a subtle state of fight or flight. Even in moments of calm, your mind is scanning for the next threat. That unread message, maybe they're mad, That delay in response, maybe you did something wrong. That silence, maybe you're not enough. The truth is, most of us are not experiencing life directly. We're experiencing our interpretation of it filtered through past trauma, unmet needs, and inherited beliefs. That's why two people can face the same situation and react completely differently. One sees uncertainty and feels excited. The other sees it and feels paralyzed. It's not about the situation, it's about the story. So how do you change the story? You start by noticing it. You start by pausing when that familiar rush of anxiety kicks in and asking, is this real or is this just a pattern? You begin to recognize that not every thought is a fact. That just because a fear shows up doesn't mean you have to obey it. And then the hardest part, you start letting go. Letting go doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming present. It means choosing to focus your energy on what's real, what's now, what's within your reach, instead of trying to mentally solve a future that hasn't arrived. So many of us confuse safety with control. We think if we plan hard enough, anticipate every outcome, rehearse every possibility, we'll finally feel okay. But has that ever worked? Probably not. Because control is a myth. Life is fluid. People change. Plans fall apart. And the truth is, the more tightly you try to grip the future, the more you miss what's actually unfolding in front of you. Emotional freedom requires a different kind of strength, the strength to loosen your grip. The courage to allow life to be messy, imperfect, and uncertain without letting it hijack your inner peace. And that peace doesn't come from doing more. It comes from needing less. Less validation, less performance, less explaining, less apologizing for simply being who you are. When you start detaching from the need to be everything for everyone, you begin to discover the version of yourself that doesn't shrink to fit, the version that doesn't contort to please, the version that knows how to sit with discomfort, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. This is what true inner revolution looks like, not loud, not angry, not chaotic, but still calm and certain. Let's ground this in something more tangible. Imagine a woman who for years based her self-worth on being liked. She said yes when she wanted to say no. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. She checked her tone, her outfits, her words, afraid of seeming too much. But one day, maybe after heartbreak, maybe after burnout, maybe after simply being tired, she paused, and in that pause, she heard herself. She didn't hear a demand. She heard a need. A soft voice that said, "What if you didn't keep abandoning yourself?" That one moment of clarity didn't fix everything, but it changed her direction. She started saying no more often. She stopped chasing people who were indifferent. She unplugged from situations that drained her, even if they were familiar. And in doing so, she began to feel a strange, unfamiliar sense of lightness. That's the essence of emotional independence. It's not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. 100 small choices to return to yourself, especially when it would be easier and more socially accepted to abandon yourself. And here's the paradox. The less you chase approval, the more you begin to experience genuine connection. Not the kind built on performance, but the kind rooted in authenticity. Not the kind where you're liked for the version you pretend to be, but the kind where you're loved for exactly who you are. The people who belong in your life won't need you to explain your worth. They'll feel it in your presence, in your boundaries, in your silence. You won't need to convince. You'll just need to be. As you begin walking this path, you'll start to notice something else. The world around you might resist your change at first. You may lose some people. You may unsettle some dynamics. But that's okay. Because you're not here to keep the peace at the cost of your own. You're here to live truthfully, and that truth, it doesn't shout. It doesn't justify. It doesn't perform. It just is. It sits inside you like a steady flame lighting your way home again and again. The real independence begins there, not on the outside, but deep within. When you stop fighting for space in places that don't honor you. When you stop begging for clarity from people who thrive on confusion. When you stop shrinking just to stay close to people who fear your fullness. That is when emotional freedom becomes your new baseline. Not a luxury, not a reward, but your birthright. And once you've tasted that kind of freedom, the kind that doesn't depend on anything external, you realize there's no going back. The moment emotional freedom becomes your baseline, everything begins to feel different, not because the world suddenly became kinder or more predictable or easier, but because you stopped expecting it to be. You stopped needing it to be. Instead, you returned home to your own inner calm, your own stillness, your own unwavering truth. That's the kind of peace that can't be granted by any law date or political system. It's not found in fireworks or anthems, but in a deep breath you take after choosing not to explain yourself. In the calm that settles when you finally stop rehearsing a version of yourself for others to accept. It's in the stillness that comes from realizing that not everything needs to be resolved right now. That you don't need all the answers lined up like soldiers before you can rest. That you can live in the space between what was and what will be and still be whole. That's where the real revolution begins. Emotional independence is learning to be still even when the world is loud. It's being grounded even when plans fall apart. It's saying, I don't know, but I trust myself to find out instead of scrambling for certainty. It's not about being unaffected by life, it's about being unshaken by it. So what does this feel like? It feels like a slower breath, like less noise in your head, like less urgency in your decisions. You're no longer running from moment to moment trying to fix control and prove you're arriving fully into each one. You might find yourself smiling more, not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer burdened by the invisible weight of shoulds. You start speaking with clarity because you're no longer fogged by the need for approval. You start hearing others more deeply because you're not consumed by the internal chatter that once demanded constant attention. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to feel safe. Not because the world guaranteed you safety, but because you stopped making your peace conditional on external circumstances. Because you chose to respond instead of react. Because you started trusting your own energy more than anyone else's opinion. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop apologizing for your joy. You stop justifying your needs. Because now you know freedom doesn't require permission. That's what makes it real. When July 4th comes around, many will celebrate it with flags, fireworks, and feasts. But you'll know a quieter celebration, one that begins in your body, your breath, your being. A celebration of the day you stopped abandoning yourself for the comfort of others. The day you declared that your mind, your heart, and your energy are sacred spaces no longer available to chaos disguised as love. or pressure disguised as purpose. You might look the same on the outside. Your routines, your responsibilities, your roles, they may not have changed much. But inside, something subtle but seismic has shifted. You are no longer at war with yourself. You're no longer building stories out of fear, no longer responding to silence with self-blame, no longer negotiating your worth through the behavior of others. This is what freedom feels like when it's real, calm, clear, quiet. It's not a roar, it's a whisper, a knowing, a steady, steady flame that doesn't need to burn anything down to prove it's alive. Letting go of worry, of guilt, of performance. It's not a one-time decision. It's a series of small, sacred choices made every day to pause, to breathe, to trust. It's choosing to meet life as it is, not as you feared it would be. It's choosing to come home to yourself again and again. And the beautiful part is this: when you start living this way, with less fear and more presence, with less proving and more peace, the world begins to respond to you differently. You start attracting clarity, connection, and calm. Not because you're lucky, but because you finally stopped chasing the noise and made space for what's true. So today, as others light fireworks in the sky, maybe you light something within: a decision, a breath, a soft but powerful reminder. Your freedom doesn't begin with the world outside you. It begins in the quiet moment you decide to stop performing, stop controlling, stop chasing, and start being. That is the real independence. And it starts within. If this message stirred something in you, I'd love to hear about it. What are you choosing to let go of this season? What does freedom look like for you, not out there, but in here? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep growing, healing, and walking this path together.